If your garden feels expensive, exhausting, and harder every year, the problem is not your soil. It is the way most people garden. They buy more. They spray more. They dig more. Then they wonder why their back hurts and the harvest still disappoints. My grandmother had a different way. She never called it sustainable. She never used fancy words. She just hated waste. Onion skins, cardboard, old paper, fireplace ash, broken pots, window frames, dead leaves, and kitchen scraps all had a second life in her garden. That is how she kept a big vegetable patch going with almost no cash out of pocket. And that is what I want to give you here. 17 simple, practical, low-cost tricks. Some are free. Some use things you were probably going to throw away. All of them are about one idea: work with nature, not against it. If you do that, you get a garden that asks less from your back, less from your wallet, and less from your time. Let me start with the one that raises the most eyebrows. A lot of old-timers stacked potatoes in old tires. The idea was simple. You plant seed potatoes low, then keep adding soil or straw as the plants grow. Each new layer can make more tubers. In theory, you get more potatoes in the same small space without digging up half the yard. The catch is the material. I need to be straight with you. I would not use unknown old tires around food crops if I had a choice. Rubber is not where I would put my trust for potatoes, tomatoes, or anything I plan to eat. If you already have clean tires and you want to use the tower idea for ornamentals, that is one thing. For food, I would rather you build the same vertical potato tower with wooden boards, straw bales, feed sacks, or even a stack of sturdy nursery pots. The method works. The container is the part I would change. And that is the first lesson in this whole style of gardening. The shape matters less than the principle. Keep the crop covered. Keep adding loose material. Keep the light out of the developing tubers. You do not need to dig a trench the size of a bathtub. You need a place where roots can keep expanding. My grandmother used to say, "A potato does not care what fancy box you put it in." She was right. It only cares about loose soil, a little moisture, and darkness. Now let me give you a trick that is as old as the kitchen itself. Garlic. If insects are chewing your plants, do not rush to a shelf full of harsh sprays. Take a few cloves of garlic, crush them, and steep them in water overnight. Strain it, then use that water as a light barrier spray around the leaves and stems. The smell helps confuse soft-bodied pests, and it is much gentler than the heavy stuff most people reach for first. If you want to boost it, add a tiny drop of mild liquid soap so it sticks. Not much, just enough to help it cling. Here is the part most people miss. Spray in the evening, not in the heat of the day, and do not soak open blossoms. You want to avoid bothering the bees while they are working. Once the spray dries, it is a far calmer option for a family garden than many commercial chemicals. It is not magic. It will not solve a bad infestation by itself, but it is a very good first line of defense, especially for aphids, whiteflies, and other pests that hate a strong smell. The cheap version costs almost nothing if you already have garlic in the kitchen. That is my favorite kind of garden remedy. Next, let me save you from a lot of frustration with slugs and snails. They are lazy. That is actually useful. Put down a piece of plywood, a scrap of cardboard, or a flat board near the problem area late in the afternoon. By morning, the slugs will often hide under it because it stays cool and damp. Then you lift the board and remove them in one place instead of chasing them across the whole bed. That is the entire trick. You turn a night problem into a morning collection job. People spend good money on slug bait and still miss the real issue. Often the easiest fix is not a product. It is simply knowing where the pests go when the sun is up. If you have bad knees or a sore back, make the board light enough to move without strain. Or use a long-handled grabber so you do not have to bend much. That matters. A garden trick is only useful if you can actually use it. I have seen people put a board down, check it once a day, and cut their slug damage in half in 1 week. No drama, no chemicals, just a better habit. Now for one of my favorite old-school seed-starting hacks. Use newspaper cups for seedlings. Take a few sheets of plain newspaper, Wrap them around a small jar or can. Fold the bottom, and you have a biodegradable pot. Fill it with seed mix. Plant your seeds. When it is time to move them, set the whole cup into the ground. The paper breaks down, the roots keep growing, and you do not shock the plant by tearing it out of a hard plastic cell. The mistake most people make is using glossy paper or making the cup too flimsy. You want plain, black and white newspaper. And you want a cup that will hold together long enough to get the seedling established. Keep it moist, but not swampy. A tray underneath helps a lot. This is a beautiful trick if you do not want to spend money on seed trays. It is also easier on your hands if you have arthritis. No hard plastic cells to squeeze. No wrestling roots free from a tight pot. Just plant the cup and move on. My grandmother used to stack these little cups on a baking sheet by the window. She said it looked like a tiny town of green hats before Easter. I still think of that every spring. Another ancient idea that still works beautifully is the olla. An olla is just an unglazed clay pot buried in the soil and filled with water. Because the clay is porous, the water slowly seeps out right where the roots need it. That means less evaporation, less waste, and fewer trips with the hose. It is one of the smartest watering systems ever invented, and it does not need electricity, pressure, or a single moving part. Most people water the surface and hope the roots get enough. With an olla, moisture goes underground where it belongs. That is especially useful for tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and anything in a raised bed that dries out fast. The common mistake is using a glazed pot. A glazed pot will not seep the same way. You need unglazed clay. Cover the top so mosquitoes cannot get in, and place it close enough to the plants that the roots can reach the moisture. In hot weather, you may need to refill it more often. In cooler weather, not as often. This is one of those tricks that costs a little if you buy the pot new. But if you find an old clay pot with a crack, do not throw it away too fast. If the crack is small, it may still serve perfectly as an olla in the ground. And speaking of weather, nothing saves spring seedlings like an old window frame. A cold frame is simply a low box with a clear top. Old window glass, an old storm window, or a salvaged frame can trap heat from the sun and protect tender plants from cold nights. It is a greenhouse at ground level. It works because of physics, not luck. The sun warms the air and the soil during the day, and the frame slows the heat loss after dark. The biggest mistake is not venting it. On a sunny spring day, a cold frame can overheat fast. Prop it open a crack when the sun is strong. Close it again before evening. That little habit keeps seedlings from cooking. If you live in a colder USDA zone, this trick matters even more. In northern areas, add a little extra caution to your timing. Do not trust one warm afternoon. Trust the soil and the local forecast. You can build a cold frame almost free if you already have old lumber and a salvaged window. That is the kind of project that used to make my grandmother smile because she saw value where other people saw junk. Now let us talk about a very old, very useful powder. Diatomaceous earth is made from tiny fossilized sea creatures. In garden terms, it is a physical pest barrier. It damages the outer shell of crawling insects. That is why it can help with things like earwigs, beetles, and some other soft-bodied pests when it is used correctly. It is not a poison. It is a fine dust with a mechanical effect. The trick is to apply it lightly in dry conditions. If it gets wet, it loses effectiveness and you have to reapply. Do not dump it in piles. A thin, even dusting is better. And do not breathe the dust. Wear a mask if you are spreading it. That part matters. This is where people go wrong. They think more is better. It is not. A little does the job. Too much just makes a mess. Food-grade diatomaceous earth is a lower toxicity option than many synthetic pesticides, but you still need common sense. Keep it away from blossoms when pollinators are active. Use it where pests travel, not everywhere you can imagine. It is a tool, not a miracle. Here is one of the cheapest liquid feeds you can make from waste. Onion skins. Do not throw them away. Soak the dry skins in water for a day or two, then strain the liquid and use it as a light soil drench around plants. Onion skins do not make a full fertilizer. Let me be honest about that. They are not a miracle meal for your crops. but they do carry useful compounds and trace elements, and they make a gentle tonic when you are trying to stretch your garden budget. The common mistake is expecting too much. This is not a replacement for rich compost. It is a small support, a little boost, a way to reuse what would otherwise hit the trash. If your compost pile is active, onion skins belong there too. But if you want to make a simple steeping tea from them, that is a fine old habit. My grandmother used to add onion skins to the water bucket after peeling vegetables. She said the garden should smell like supper from time to time. I still like that. Now take care of your soil with a blanket, not a shovel. Mulching is one of the greatest shortcuts in gardening. Put straw, dry grass, chopped leaves, or shredded plant matter over the soil surface. That layer holds moisture, blocks light from weeds, and keeps the ground from baking hard in the sun. It also feeds the soil as it breaks down. The mistake most people make is mulching too thinly. A dusting is not enough. You want a real blanket, but do not pile it right against plant stems. Leave a little breathing room so moisture does not rot the base of the plant. This is the lazy gardener's friend. It means fewer weeds, less watering, and less bare dirt exposed to the sun. If you have bad knees, this is a gift. You put the mulch down once, and it keeps working while you stay upright. If you want a free mulch, look at autumn leaves, dried grass clippings that have not been treated with herbicide, or chopped garden waste. That material is often worth more in the garden than it would ever be in the trash. And if you want real pest control without spraying, invite birds. Birds are your sky patrol. If you plant a few shrubs, leave a water source, and avoid turning your whole yard into a sterile lawn, birds will come. They eat caterpillars, beetles, grubs, and all sorts of little troublemakers. A simple bird bath, a feeder, or even a brushy corner can turn your yard into a hunting ground for the good guys. People forget that a balanced garden has predators. That is not a problem. That is the system working. The common mistake is spraying so much that you scare off the helpful birds and insects, then wondering why the pests come back harder. If you want more birds, give them reasons to stay. Water matters. Shelter matters. A little native plant cover matters. You do not need a fancy wildlife program. You just need a yard that looks alive. My grandmother never talked about beneficials. She just said, if the birds are busy, the bugs are nervous. That was her whole philosophy. Now let us talk about wood ash, because this one can help or hurt depending on how you use it. Ash from a clean wood fire can add potassium and calcium to the garden. It can also help reduce acidity in soil that is too sour. That is useful if you know your soil leans acidic. But this is not a pour-it-everywhere material. Use it carefully. A little goes a long way. The mistake is using ash like it is compost. It is not compost. It is concentrated. Sprinkle only a light dusting, and only where it makes sense. Do not use ash near acid-loving plants that prefer lower pH. Do not use ash from treated wood, painted wood, or charcoal briquettes. You want clean hardwood ash only. This is one of those free amendments that used to matter a lot in farm kitchens. If you have a fireplace or wood stove, you may already have the material sitting there. That is real garden money. Next comes a trick that has changed more neglected beds than almost anything else. Cardboard against weeds. Lay plain cardboard over weedy ground. Overlap the seams, wet it down, and cover it with mulch or compost. The light gets cut off. The weeds weaken and die. Earthworms move in underneath. The soil begins to soften. That is no-till gardening at its simplest. This is one of the smartest ways to reclaim a bed without digging your spine into dust. If you hate bending, this one is worth learning. It also lets you turn lawn into planting space without tilling the whole patch. The biggest mistake is using glossy cardboard with too much tape and plastic. You want plain brown cardboard, no heavy coatings, and no labels that leave a mess behind. Remove all tape and stickers if you can. Then soak it well so it lies flat. I have seen people put down cardboard in the fall and come back in spring to a bed full of earthworms and loose soil. That is the kind of quiet magic that makes gardeners smile. Now let us talk about seed saving, because the best seeds come from the best plants. Do not save seed from weak, diseased, or poorly performing plants. Save seed from the strongest plants that handled your local weather, your soil, and your pests best. That is how you slowly build a garden that fits your yard. This is where a lot of people go wrong. They save seed from whatever is left at the end of the season. That is backwards. You want the plants that were healthy, productive, and true to the traits you care about. If a tomato plant produced early, tasted good, and resisted disease, that is the one to remember. This is also where cross-pollination matters. If you want clean seed, keep related varieties separated by enough distance, or use physical covers, or save from self-pollinating crops that are easier to manage. The exact distance depends on the crop, so check the plant family before you rely on saved seed. If in doubt, isolate more, not less. My grandmother saved bean seed in little jars and wrote the year on the lid. She knew that seed saving was not nostalgia. It was insurance. Sunflowers can do more than make you smile. They can act like living stakes and windbreaks. Plant them on the edge of a bed, and they can soften harsh wind while attracting bees and other pollinators. They also create a visual wall that makes tender plants feel less exposed. Tall varieties are especially useful on the north or west side of a bed, depending on your yard. The mistake is planting them too close to your smaller crops. Sunflowers are useful, but they are not shy. Give them space so they do not steal too much light or water from the plants you are trying to protect. I like this trick for beans, cucumbers, and young transplants that need a little help settling in. A line of sunflowers can change the whole feel of a garden. It looks cheerful, yes, but it also works hard. And while we are rethinking plants people call weeds, let us talk about dandelions. Dandelions are stubborn, yes, but they are also useful. The young leaves are edible if you know the plant has not been sprayed. The roots go deep, which helps break up compact soil. The flowers feed early pollinators when not much else is blooming. In other words, this weed is doing several jobs at once. The mistake is treating every dandelion like an enemy. Sometimes a patch in the right place is just nature repairing a bad spot. That does not mean you let them take over a lawn if you do not want them there. It means you respect what they tell you about the soil. My grandmother used to say a dandelion was a teacher. It showed where the soil was tired, hard, or disturbed. That is a better way to think about it than just calling it a pest. Now, one more thing on seed care, because all the saving in the world does not matter if your seed is ruined in storage. Use paper envelopes for dry seed. Paper lets a little air move. That matters. Seed that is still carrying hidden moisture can mold in a sealed plastic container. A simple paper envelope, kept in a cool, dark, dry place, protects the seed better than many people think. Write the plant name and year on each one. Then store them in a tin or box away from heat. The mistake is sealing damp seed too soon. That is how you invite mold. Dry the seed first, then envelop it, then store it in a place that stays steady, not on top of a hot refrigerator or in a damp basement corner. If you want extra protection, tuck the envelopes into a larger container with something dry, like a little silica packet or a bit of dry rice in a separate pouch. You do not need to overcomplicate it. You just need dry, cool, and dark. That is how you keep next year's garden from depending on next year's store trip. And if you want the cleanest, cheapest way to keep old soil from becoming hard and tired, there is one more old habit I want you to remember. Reuse the leftovers. Leaves become mulch. Cardboard becomes weed control. Newspaper becomes seed pots. Old clay pots become watering systems. Window frames become cold frames. Kitchen scraps become tonics or compost. Wood ash becomes a soil amendment. Birds become pest control. Sunflowers become shelter. Dandelions become a sign, and sometimes a meal. That is the real secret here. The garden gets better when you stop throwing away everything that still has value. You do not need to make gardening painful to make it productive. You do not need to buy every problem its own bottle. You do not need to spend all day bent over the soil. Some of the best work is done by physics, weather, worms, birds, and time. And if you do this the old way, the sensible way, you start to see the changes. The soil stays darker and damp longer. The weeds thin out. The seedlings transplant cleaner. The pests have a harder time. The beds ask for less water. The harvest keeps coming with less strain on your back. That is the garden my grandmother would recognize. A place that keeps working after you have gone inside. And if you want to keep going from here, the next thing I would show you is how to store that harvest so it lasts through winter without a root cellar. That is another old trick worth knowing, especially if you want your pantry to look full when the snow starts falling.